Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual Grow to CEO. If you've attended one of our events before, you know that this is very different than what we're used to, but we have a wonderful panel here today, and they're sure to make this another great Grow to CEO. I want to take a second to thank our sponsors for today's webinar. Our title sponsors are J.E. Dunn and SS&C. And our professional development sponsors are Bryan Cave and H&R Block. We also have several other sponsors who help make all of our genKC events possible. So thank you to those companies listed here as well. A quick overview of the webinar. We'll have 45 minutes of moderated discussion with our panelists. If you have any questions for the panelists, please submit those by using the chat feature on Zoom. Just type them in there. And please make sure that your mic is muted. We would also love for you to tweet or Instagram about the webinar as it happens, and use the hashtag genKC and hashtag GrowToCEO and tag genKC. Our Twitter handle is @genKC and Instagram handle is @genKC1. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for today's panel. Wesley Fields is a managing partner at Bryan Cave, Leighton, Paisner. With 20 years of experience, Wesley focuses his practice in public finance and corporate transactions, negotiating and preparing documentation for business joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, and sales. Wesley, thank you so much for moderating our panel for us today, and I will hand it over to you.
Okay, now I think I'm unmuted. Madison, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you to the Chamber, genKC, for putting this together. This is actually my second time moderating this discussion. I'm excited about the panelists that we have on board that will be joining in this conversation, which are questions that are primarily generated by you, the members of genKC. As you'll note throughout many of the questions that I'll ask the panelists to give responses to, many of them are geared to our new normal, the COVID-19 crisis, the stay-at-home orders, and how we are managing through that and how you're managing through all of that. So without much more about me and in this discussion, I'm going to kick it actually to our panelists to allow them to introduce themselves. And I will start with Rich.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Rich Smith, President and CEO of Henderson Engineers. And I was thinking about this week. About a third of my career has been on the technical side of our business, a third on the marketing and client and business development side. And then a third, the most recent third, has been on leadership. And so each one has kind of led me to where I'm at right now. So hopefully that'll be an interesting perspective for everybody to hear today. So excited to be here.
Great, thanks, Rich. Melea.
Good afternoon, everyone. Melea McRea. I am founder and CEO of Crux KC. It's a little boutique marketing firm headquartered down in the Crossroads. I launched Crux in 2016 after a very long career. I won't even tell you how many years. I'm going to pretend to be your age on this call, but a very long career in marketing, working for many different clients over the years. One of them was the Greater Kansas City Chamber. I was the Chief Marketing Officer for the Chamber from 2011 to 2014. It's a pleasure to be with them today and with all of you.
Great, thank you, Melea. Last but certainly not least, Keith.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith Bradley. I'm co-owner of Made in Kansas City. We are a local goods retail store with 6 locations across the metro area, working with over 250 Kansas City-based artists, makers, and designers. And we also own and operate 3 cafes and bars serving locally roasted coffee and local drinks. Thanks for having me today.
Great. I'm going to jump right in to a number of these questions. A lot of the questions that were sent in by the folks, you all through genKC, dealt with the experience of working from home. So I'm going to jump right in to some questions about that experience. And we'll start off with Rich. Rich, how do you maintain discipline amid distractions caused by working from home?
So I have 4 kids, so the challenge is definitely real, and the challenge is there. You know, I think from my perspective, I'm trying to wake up and treat every day the same as if I was going into the office. And so I shave and shower and put on work clothes and try to look presentable. But I think the most important thing is that I've set some ground rules with my family, and you know what's off limits and what is not off limits. Fortunately, my kids are a little bit older, so they all think they're in college, and so they're staying up late and sleeping in. So the mornings are pretty quiet around here. The other thing that I've done is I've tried to recreate the atmosphere, at least the work atmosphere, similar to where in Lenexa, to our corporate headquarters. And it's like down to the position of my monitors even, because I was having trouble with some neck pain. And I finally realized that I needed to adjust my monitor to have it be similar to what it was like at the office. But I think those 3 things are primarily what I'm focusing on right now.
Great. Sound advice, Richard. Appreciate it. I'm going to kick it to Keith now. And this is an issue that I certainly struggle with. And that is maintaining my sanity while I have kids coming into the room on Zoom conference calls. They don't get my attention, and they'll start putting notes in front of me, trying to get my attention. How are you, Keith, able to balance the mental health needs of your employees while also maintaining business productivity?
Yes, Rich, I also have 4 kids, so interesting to know that about you. Not always easy to do at certain times. Mine are much younger than yours, but yeah, this was certainly an issue for us as we transitioned from a really cohesive, fun office environment to everybody being in their own homes. And we had never done anything like this before. We always had this experience that people loved coming into the office and loved going into the shops and the stores and working with us. And so when we had to make this switch back in March, we did a couple things to really make sure that our team's mental health needs were taken care of. One of those is that even though we were all working from home, we were all connected to technology all the time, we made sure that we had shut off hours for work. And so we would make a hard and fast rule. We weren't going to contact you after 2 o'clock on certain days or after 5 o'clock on certain days, just so it didn't feel like you were always working, because you were never actually leaving the office because you were stuck at home. And so that was a real key thing that we did early on to make sure that people still had a shut off from work to home life, even though physically not much had obviously changed. And so that really helped our team quite a bit. Another thing we did is we increased the amount of communication during this time. And so we really made sure, because you couldn't get those social cues you pick up on seeing someone every day in the office. So we set up a few more regular meetings with the team. We did check-ins with the team. And we really made sure that the communication was ramped up, which is a common theme throughout some of the other things we'll talk about today. And we really wanted to make sure that things were getting done in a timely manner still, and that was accomplished through regular communication. And then lastly, we tried to make things still fun for people. We established a new sense of routine, but in that routine, we mixed it up, whether it was with happy hours or personality tests or wearing funny hats on a Zoom call one day, just to make sure that they knew that, hey, we were all fun, we're good. Even though this is different, we can still enjoy some of this. And then part of that too, we also had opportunities for everybody to showcase their own homes. So you get a glimpse in the window of their life, through the back of their screen. And so we allowed people to take it a step further. Give us a house tour this day. Show us what you worked on over the weekend. Show us the fun stuff you've been doing. And so we mixed up the balance between work, fun, and making sure they're still getting some things done.
Thanks, Keith. I would agree. Certainly the communication piece is huge. I know we've had to step up communication just to help people feel as if they're part of the organization still, right, while we're working at home. So that's critical. Good advice. Melea, let me ask you, could you give us some best practices for keeping yourself and your team engaged during this extended period of working from home?
Sure. out of the gate, I think just adjusting to this new normal was kind of clumsy, right? We were trying to feel our way through that first week or so, but thankfully we have tools at our disposal like Microsoft Teams that we were already using internally at the office to communicate on client project work. And so that second week, I instituted a 9:30 a.m. morning meeting. People didn't have to show their faces if they were not, video ready. But I wanted a half an hour of their time every morning just so we could connect. And I think that's the biggest piece being a marketing firm. There's 13 of us in the office, and what we miss is that organic collaboration piece. So I think having this 9:30 meeting was probably a bit of a moan from some people at first, to be honest. But now I think we love it. And it's a time where we're kind of, throwing jokes at one another, but we're also saying, hey, Rachel, I need you to work on this today, or can you get to it by the end of the day, or what have you. So it does kind of spur that spontaneous conversation for us. And then much like Keith, we're doing a virtual happy hour every Friday. And we have different themes. We've actually had 2 new employees. We've had an intern and then a new employee start during this, which is a whole other challenge in and of itself. So we do this thing where we put them on the hot seat and we ask them a bunch of questions just to get to know them. And we're having, drinks while we're doing that, and it makes for a lot of fun. But I also have been asking the team every week, what was your high point of the week and what was your low point? And it's almost become a little bit like therapy, I think, for the employees. And I've noticed they start to think about that during the week. Like on Wednesday, they'll say, oh, that's going to be my high point this week. So just a lot of communication face-to-face as much as possible. When we do the virtual happy hour, it's mandatory that we all have to show our faces. And we've done things like, different hats, or I actually graduated, didn't graduate, but graduated on May 16th with my executive MBA from Rockhurst. And since I didn't have an actual graduation ceremony, the team surprised me, and they were all wearing their Crux t-shirts, they had Crux hats on, and they put me on the hot seat. So it was kind of reversed, but a lot of fun. So you know what, we're just making the best of it as we can.
Awesome, Melea. Congratulations too on that. I didn't realize that.
Thank you very much. Great to have that done.
I'm sure. One of the things that I know that we struggled with at Bryan Cave, Leighton Paisner, is our work from home policy, and always being concerned about whether or not people can remain as productive at home as they are in the office. And that was particularly exacerbated, I think, as we went into this pandemic and stay at home mode. Let me ask this question of Rich. Since we've been in this pandemic, have things changed in your mind about working remotely?
So I could be accused of being a little bit of an old dog because I do have a few years and some gray hair. And I think one of the things that I've been surprised the most is that how effective it's been to work remote. Now, saying that, some of the key things that we do in our office really need to be face-to-face, some of the creative and design stuff that we do. But what I've found about myself is that there's almost 2 versions of me. There's the version, kind of the 8 to 5 Rich, that's going to meetings, answering email, text messages on the phone. And then there's the second Rich that's a little bit more free form and open and creative. And I tend to be more like that when I'm at home and also on the weekends. And what I realized is that I'm in that area, that free form Rich, that more creative Rich when I'm at home. And so that's been a huge benefit for me personally. But one of the biggest challenges that I've faced, and I've had several conversations about this even today, one of the most important things about leadership is being visible. And you've heard from everybody today that they're getting creative on how they do that. But nothing can replace kind of good old-fashioned face-to-face. And so that's probably one of the biggest struggles that I'm facing, is just that lack of face-to-face leadership and exposure and visibility.
Thanks, Rich. And by the way, I think that you're wearing the gray hair well. One of these days, you may not have any hair at all. So wear it well while you can.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm gonna change topics just a little bit. in my next question to Melea, and that is what's the unexpected positive change that you've noticed since the current pandemic?
I love this question, Wesley, because there have been several unexpected positive changes, and I think one of them is working remotely. Rich, was kind of like you, I think, in that belief that the team had to be in the office in order to be creative and to be collaborative. But I have been very pleasantly surprised with how successful we are working remotely. Probably, dare I say, even more productive because, we don't have that commute time. There's not that commute time in between meetings. That definitely has its pros and its cons in and of itself. If you look at my meeting schedule, it's usually back-to-back Zoom calls. And I kind of miss that drive time, that commute time, just to kind of decompress and get my head in the game for the next call. So I need to be more diligent of just, putting 15 minutes in my calendar or something to do that. But no, I have been really pleasantly surprised. And I've actually had quite a few employees that have said to me, do you think that we could still work remotely after this? So definitely considering that, probably not every day because I think we are missing some of that organic collaboration that I mentioned earlier. But that's probably been the biggest surprise. And then I think personally too, for me, I try to turn the off button off on Zoom at 5 o'clock every day. And I try to stop for lunch to have lunch with my daughter. I have one child, she's in the 7th grade. And have been juggling homeschooling, right, and running a business. So I'm more diligent about more time with her. So I will tell you, I've been sleeping more, I've been exercising more, I've never felt better. And it's because I don't have that commute time or that race to get her ready for school or what have you. So that has been a wonderful surprise as a result of COVID. Now, that being said, when we get back to our normal, whatever that looks like going forward, I've got to remember to hold on to some of those positive traits, right?
Yeah, very, very good advice, Leah. And I agree with you. I have about a 35-minute commute, typically from South Lee Summit to downtown. Now, without having that commute, it's a lot more time that I could spend with my daughter as well, hanging out. I also have a 7th, I guess now, rising 8th grader. So I feel you when it comes to pre-algebra and science and social and all these subjects that they're doing virtually now. It is definitely a change from the norm.
Yes.
And speaking of that, Keith, we're looking to get some advice from you on managing change. What's your advice on managing change?
Yeah, so for one of the things that has been a common theme throughout this is just communication. Over communicating to a fault, I think, is one of the keys that has helped us manage a lot of change, and one of the things I would recommend to anybody. If you think you are not communicating enough, you're probably not. If you think you're communicating too much, it's probably okay to communicate a little bit more. And then in addition with that, being able to be very vulnerable and honest in that communication of saying, I don't necessarily have the answers right now, or this is totally new situation for us, or we're working through this. Being vulnerable to your team, to your colleagues, to your peers, it really helps manage change for me personally, as well as for us as a leadership team in our business. So those are the two primary things. And the other thing is we simplified a lot of the things that we did through this time. So there's a lot of different directions our company could have gone over the last 2.5-3 months. And we simplified our goals to focus on 3 primary things to navigate through this pandemic. And that allowed us to continue to still have a guiding post. So even though things were kind of changing all around us and we were changing, we really made sure that we had very manageable goals that we continue to progress towards through this uncertain time. And so communication and being vulnerable and then sticking to your goals were key for us in managing change. Great,
thank you, Keith. Melea, I'm gonna dive back to you again and dig a little deeper on what you just talked about. I want you to give me the number one thing that you have learned from this new normal. And what's the one thing that you think that you want to take forward as we get out of this COVID-19 pandemic?
Wesley, I would say it's of communication. I felt like pre-COVID, I was a pretty decent communicator all in all. I definitely am like Rich, where I prefer face-to-face over email or texting. But I think that COVID has really pushed me to reach out to my clients on a more regular basis to take the temperature on their business and how are they doing, and just seeing how well received that has been, and they know that I truly care about them and their business. I've also reached out individually to each of my teammates on the Crux team just to check in with them, you know, over the phone. How are you doing? How are you juggling home life? I've got several that are young parents with young kids trying to homeschool. I'd rather have the 7th grader than the 5-year-old, quite frankly, to be the teacher, right? So I feel like they really appreciate that outreach too. And that's something that, of course, I can take when we're back in the office and just have more of those one-on-one conversations. So I would say never underestimate the power and the positivity of that outreach, that communication.
Thank you, Melea. I'm going to switch topics just briefly. Actually, not so much switching it, but I'm going to alter it just a little bit, and I'm going to switch to Rich now. How, Rich, do you think will COVID-19 shape the future of business as we know it?
That is a super loaded question that we could spend the entire hour talking about. You know, one of the things that's really interesting to me, I just read an article about how cities may become less attractive or more attractive, and New York City's been called the vanishing city. I also read an article where small towns have really been hit. And, you know, Kansas City is actually in a pretty good spot. We're spread out. You know, we use the automobile a lot for our transportation. And it could be an opportunity for cities like Kansas City that have a good quality of life. Virtually every business sector is going to be affected. And you could go down, you know, one by one and talk about it, whether it's sports, whether it's travel, convention. You know, I think you're going to see manufacturing begin to come back to the United States more for national security and control than anything. Entertainment is something that's interesting. I just interacted with one of my favorite artists on Facebook Live, which you never would have done pre-COVID. So I think there's some things that are going to change. But probably the thing that has me the most interested, you know, in World War II, the battleship became obsolete almost overnight. And I'm wondering if our corporate offices aren't going to be maybe the same. But I think there's a huge opportunity to mix the need for that human interaction and face-to-face with the ability to work from home and reduce commute times, and maybe even mental health will be improved as well. So I think that's kind of it. Well, one more thing. I also feel like there could be an opportunity for a new definition of what leadership is about. And, you know, being able to be nimble and think on your toes, to be able to assemble a team that's being able to pull in all their expertise and react quickly, to be able to use technology and energize and motivate your team. That's something that all of us have talked about. And also just the value of diversity and hearing and listening and hearing different things. I think there's a huge opportunity for this to maybe change the face of what leadership looks like.
Very good points. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Keith, I'm gonna kick it to you. And this is kind of a struggle that I'm sure a lot of companies face. Is, you know, we continue to evolve. We continue to try and strategize on a long-term basis. But we're also trying to deal with the immediacy of the pandemic. I'd like to know your best advice for thinking long-term during times of immediate crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great question, because it's really hard to sometimes sift through all that's coming in front of you in waves and waves. And it's also, you don't want to miss out on any opportunities that may present itself through a crisis by not looking down the road and looking long term. And so for us as a company, some of the things that we did were we put ourselves in front of the media as much as possible during this time. So we wanted to stay relevant, knowing that on the other side of this, that we still want to exist as a company And so part of that was getting our name out there. So probably in the last 2-3 months, I've been interviewed or been on the media more times than I had in the kind of 5 years life of our business, because we wanted to keep our name relevant to let our customers know that we're here, let Kansas City know that we're still here, and let them know that there's still good things to come through our business. Another thing we did is we, at the start of this, we had actually already signed at least 3 new leases on different locations for different parts of our business. And it would have been very easy to, in some ways, retreat from those or pull the trigger on those, but we've continued to move forward with long-term projects, knowing that while change is going to be inevitable and those projects might look differently than when we started them, they're still going to be important to the life and health of our business in and after this pandemic is over. And so we didn't give up on some of the long-term goals that we had already set before us. And so that throughout 2020, we have different things that we're working on. And in 2021, not only is our city going to look different, but our business is going to look very different because we stayed steady on those long-term goals. And so we did the things we needed to do to survive the last 3 months, the immediate things, while at the same time still having our eyes focused on the goals that we had already set, and realizing that we don't need to jump ship on these just because of what's currently happening. And so I think for us, it was staying relevant to the community, pivoting our business a little bit so that we can maintain that relevancy, and then keeping that great communication with our team, because they're the ones that really drive what goes on in our business, is having a great team. And so those are some long-term, those are the things we did to help our long-term trajectory as a company.
Keith, it's kind of a follow-up question on that. Have you had to alter your long-term goals at all by virtue of the crisis?
So far we have not. So far we have not, which is really encouraging on for a lot of different reasons. But the things that we were stepping towards still make sense going into this new landscape that's kind of ahead of us. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, great to hear. Melea, if you could go back to the summer of 2019, what would you tell yourself to prepare yourself for 2020?
I mean, the word of the last 3 months has been unprecedented. So I don't know that I could have said anything that I would have prepared me for this, to be very honest. You know, I don't know, Wesley, that I would have done anything radically different, to be very honest, because 2019 was such a year of amazing growth for us. I mean, hopefully we get back to that level. We had our best growth year. We had our best Q1 this year in 2020 that we've had since the inception of Crux. And I doubled our headcount. I bought really nice office furniture and really nice expensive chairs, MacBooks. You know, maybe I would have went more middle of the road with some of that to conserve more cash, but I did it for the long-term investment in the business, and I wholeheartedly believe that that is going to pay off. We doubled our office square footage too, and we signed a lease to double it again, 21. And I'm really happy to hear, Keith, that your growth plans have not changed. Ours have not as well. In fact, the budgeted revenue projection number that I have for 2020, I'm still hell-bent on us hitting that, and I think we will. I've really seen an uptick in business development activity the last 2 to 3 weeks, which has been highly encouraging. So I am not taking the foot off the gas pedal whatsoever in terms of gunning for that number. We all have to remember, though, to have a successful business, it takes 3 things really. At the end of the day, you've got to have that market validated product or service. You've got to have a service that's in demand. You've got to have a strong leader and leadership team. But number 3, you have to have cash flow. So it has been an interesting juggling act in terms of managing that so far this year. But, knock on wood, we haven't lost any clients. We still have clients that pay on time. So it's been good. And we also did get the PPP loan, which was incredibly helpful in safety net for us and for that cash flow possible issue. So yeah, it's kind of like you hang on as tight as you can and you just keep it going with a smile on your face. That's what we've been doing.
Yeah, awesome. Good advice. Definitely good advice. Rich, this is, I'm going to switch topics just briefly and talk about this video conference norm that we're in. now, and the impact that it has, I think, a little bit on connecting, so to speak, with the people that we're talking to, whether it's employees or clients, or whatever the case may be. When you're on these video conferences, how are you able to express empathy virtually during these conversations, whether you're talking about layoffs or budget or reductions, or even trying to empathize with the needs of a client? How are you able to convey that on a video conference as opposed to face-to-face? I think you're on mute. You have to unmute, Rich. There you go.
First off, I think your history precedes yourself, and if you have a legacy of leading in a certain way, that's going to give you a kitchen pass, at least for a while. My approach is going to be a little bit different if I'm trying to address the entire company or whether it's one-on-one. I definitely think trying to explain the why and give as many facts as possible to kind of outline the situation, making sure that people understand that this is going to be a shared situation and leadership is doing their part as well, as something that we try to talk about. Something that I have not done as good a job as I should have is trying to connect the current situation and the changes that we're making back to our vision and purpose as a company, because those things shouldn't change, right? Whether we're in a pandemic or whether we're in a great growth mode. And so, in thinking about this panel, that's something that I'm going to do better at. I also feel like in particular, if it's a one-on-one situation, that you need to maybe practice through some of the scenarios that could happen. And I would also recommend giving a little bit of a heads up to whoever you're going to be connecting with that this potentially could be difficult news. Certainly I was brought up that you deliver difficult news face-to-face. And, like overnight, it became impossible to do that. And so we've all really had to be challenged on how you deliver difficult and challenging news remotely using technology. But those are a few tips that I would use.
Yeah, that's good advice. I know one of the things that I always try and stress is part of what you just said in terms of describing the shared experience that you're having to go through, as well as the person on the other side. And then also, from my perspective, what I always like to do is make sure that the person feels valued, even if the news is not necessarily the best they want to hear. There's still value for the contributions that they've made to the business and to the organization. So good advice. And
Wesley,
yeah.
There's a great book called Leaders Eat Last. And it's all about servant leadership, but the opposite is true. We should be the ones that have to sacrifice the first in these challenging times. And so I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Keith, I'm going to kick it to you now. And this is a question that I've actually thought about a little bit as well during this crisis. So in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, do you think leaders in large corporations are faced with different challenges than those in smaller businesses? Or do you think the challenges are largely the same? What's your perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because as small business owners, we often look to other bigger businesses than us in terms of examples or leadership or trends. And this COVID-19 crisis has really presented some new and interesting trends. So there are some businesses that are having their best, not only best Q2 ever, but best quarters ever through this pandemic. And then there's, bankruptcy news, hitting us left and right. I think largely the nuts and bolts are largely the same. However, with smaller companies, we have a more opportunity to be more nimble throughout a crisis, whether that's shifting a direction our team is going, whether that is the smaller things of getting our team to work from home. Doing that for a 70-person workforce is different than doing that for a 1,000-person workforce. And I think those challenges there exist that are different and nuanced. But I think in terms, and then also the other side of that is the public response or visibility of the larger businesses is really different. So those CEOs of larger corporations have much a bigger target on their back, not only in how they respond to the crisis, but how their business is doing through the crisis. how they respond to bankruptcy. Are they doing bonuses before the bankruptcy? All that sort of stuff that smaller companies don't necessarily have to deal with, though they should be attentive to those things for sure. I think those differences really make a difference in how leaders navigate a pandemic. How do you respond if you're having the best season of your life when the world is kind of crumbling around you? How do you navigate bankruptcy when it's something you're trying to avoid for the entire life of your business? But in terms of the actual nuts and bolts of leadership, some of the things we've been talking about, communication, vulnerability, making sure your team is safe and healthy, I think are all largely the same. That's the other part of this too, is as we've been allowed to reopen and other bigger businesses have been allowed to reopen too, the safety measures and precautions they put in place for their employees and their customers, they're going to get looked at and scrutinized differently. And so I think for leaders of larger corporations, they really got to make sure that they're taking care of all of their team members because they're setting an example for the larger public. It's a health, a societal health issue at that point. Target versus someone coming to our stores, very different response, very different outcomes, consequences. So in that sense, they do have a bigger responsibility. But as a smaller company, we've often looked to those other leaders of larger companies on how they handle and navigate these times.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, dealing with a large office of lawyers, which is sometimes like herding cats, but nevertheless, what's interesting about it is, and this is probably typical for many large corporations, which is we have several different practice groups. So for a business, it would be several different business lines. And so some of those business lines or practice groups have been just as busy, if not busier, during the pandemic. But on the other side, you've had groups that have not been as busy. And so walking the line between really motivating those and keeping morale up for those and encouraging those who are not necessarily been as busy during the time, while at the same time telling those that are extremely busy that they're doing a great job and that they're valued. But even those that aren't necessarily all that busy, the message still has to be the same, I think, in that you may not be busy, but you're still a valued part of the organization and the business, and managing the dynamic between those business lines that are highly productive and those that are not necessarily as productive can be difficult, but it's something that I think is part of what we've had to deal with, I think, from a large company or large firm perspective. Melea, I'm going to kick it to you, and I'm going to touch base on a similar concept that Rich just addressed, but I want to get your perspective on it. And that is some tips from you on how you handle conversations with team members in this video conference remote new norm that we're in.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a little bit about what Rich said earlier too, about getting your mindset ready for work, like getting dressed. Not just wearing sweatpants and putting a blazer on over a blouse, but actually doing your hair and coming in to the quote unquote home office and being ready for work. And I think that gets your head in the game first and foremost. But I've had to have some tough conversations with employees over a video chat, and I think one of the first prerequisites for me is that they're on video. So it's the closest that we can get to having that face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball conversation. Yes, showing empathy, understanding they're dealing with all kinds of new challenges on the home front, and letting them voice some of those concerns and feel like they're understood and that they're heard. So yeah, I think that the best thing we can do right now is to do as much over video, quote unquote, face-to-face as we can. I've also noticed there's been times early on with client meetings where I wasn't exactly video ready. And so I just had my headshot up there and the connection was not nearly as strong. It just wasn't, because you truly can read body language and things like that over video. And so again, I have made it a point that at 9 a.m., which is an hour later than when I used to start working, that I am a video call ready and ready to start the day and have as many of those face-to-face conversations that I can. But I think it is critically important right now that we're showing extra empathy, especially when dealing with our employees, because again, you don't know what kind of challenges they're facing on the home front right now. So just
Very
being
true.
yeah.
Yeah, very, very true. I'm going to ask all three of you the same question, and I'm going to start with Keith, and then Rich, and then Melea, if you could chime in on your perspective on this. And it's a pretty broad question, so you all each may have a separate take on it. And that is, how do you lead through uncertain times when everyone is looking to the top for decisions? And Keith,
Yes.
I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, for us, we did a couple things that sort of what we've has been a common theme with communication, but we had our overarching goal and mission as a business. And as Rich mentioned, that didn't change for us, no matter what was going on. However, how that looked changed. And so we really simplified those down to three main goals. And for us, during this pandemic, it was, we had 7 different revenue streams through 7 locations and an online store. And those all went away overnight to only 1 revenue stream. And so we focused on our 1 revenue stream, which was our online store. And then we wanted to do our part in this pandemic. And so we partnered with another company to produce face masks. And so we produced tens of thousands of face masks over the last 2.5 months. And then we wanted to build community through this time. And so part of what I mentioned earlier about being in front of the media, talking about our story, talking to our customers through the media. We also started a podcast to discuss the pandemic and how it was affecting our business and how it was affecting Kansas City. So on the surface, our business was brick and mortar retail, selling locally made goods. And then that shifted through the pandemic to online sales, face masks, and building community. And we still tie those into our mission of cultivating creativity, supporting local artists and makers. And so with those 3 goals, that really gave us a platform and a way to make decisions throughout the next 2 or 3 months as everything around us was changing. Does it fit with these 3 goals? If it does, we're going to continue and pursue them. It gave our team a rallying cry. So yeah, maybe you were only this part of our company, but now you're in this part of our company and this is what you're going to focus on. And so it really helped us navigate the changing world around us. It gave our employees purpose. And if something came up and it didn't fall with those three goals, it was okay to set them aside for now because it's a pandemic and everything's changing, but we're going to focus on doing these things so that we can come out on the other side of this stronger and better than ever. And so for us, when everyone's looking for direction, we had those 3 clear objectives. And that gave us guidance through this time. So I think that was a really good thing for us because not only were our employees looking for us to direction, but lots of other small businesses were. The artists and makers that we buy goods from and that we support were also looking to us. And so we realized that our actions had a ripple effect. And so we really wanted to be deliberate about them and clear about them and set an example for others as well.
Great. Thank you, Keith. Rich.
Okay, so we have all of our employees go through the Strength Finders program, and my number 1 strength is positivity. And certainly this has been a huge challenge, but the silver lining for this is that it's been a really good opportunity for leadership to shine. And our senior leadership team has really come together through this, and we've been forced to. There was a while when we were meeting every day at 8 a.m. and just trying to work through this. As far as the company goes, very, very early on, we had a lot of communication. We didn't have all the answers, but we told our employees that as soon as we knew, we would let them know. And we were trying to be out in front as much as possible and being transparent as much as possible. Our plan from day 1 was to serve clients, to be a resource for our clients, to help flatten the curve, and then we were going to do whatever we could do internally to try to save as many jobs as possible. And that message, those 4 goals are something that we've reiterated, over the course of the last 2 months. But I think seeing leadership, and not just at Henderson Engineers, but everywhere, and listening to the other leaders, including you, Wesley, it's inspiring, to see people rise to the challenge to try to overcome this together.
Thank you, Rich. Speaking about leadership in general. Oh, I'm sorry, Leah. You were gonna chime in. I don't want to skip you. Please jump in.
If you want me to chime in, Wesley, I'm happy to. You know,
I certainly want you to.
thank you. As everybody was talking, that quote that actually started my last blog popped into my mind by Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. It has been a time, I think, for all of us to really analyze the value that we're bringing to our clients, both internally and externally, and to pivot as needed. I will say in those early days in reaching out to clients, you know, we build marketing strategies for our clients and then we implement on those. Well, every single client's strategy changed overnight. And so we were right there with them as they were devising this new plan. We were helping them do that and then implementing on it. And I would say that the team, everybody was working 14-hour days for probably 3 weeks solid, killing themselves. But we had this internal mantra that we were going to overserve our clients and show the value that they get by hiring Crux. And everybody definitely lived up to that challenge, and beyond impressed with this team. Things have thankfully started to settle out a little bit, but even internally, you know, we had to look at what could we pivot in terms of the value that we're bringing to our clients, because marketing's an easy thing to cut from a budget. Trust me, been there, done that. So we had to prove ourselves as being invaluable. And again, I think that we've risen to the challenge very well. And I think that internally we've made some changes and maybe opened our minds to some new offerings for clients, especially for new business as we move forward. And then also just what everybody else was saying, the importance of communication, both transparent and honest, and showing that integrity. You know, if your team believes in you as a leader, they will trust you, and they will trust you to lead them out of this crisis.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's certainly good advice. Clarity, transparency, communication. Those are all things that are resonating with me that you all have said in response to that question. I'm going to give you all each an opportunity to address this next question. I know we're coming up on a time limitation. Actually, I'm going to ask this question specifically of Keith, and then I'm going to ask you to chime in as well, Melea. And this is for those genKCers that are aspiring leaders and may have some extra time on their hands during the pandemic. If you could recommend some reading material for them to educate themselves on becoming a leader, Keith, what reading material would you recommend?
Yeah, so this actually came at a good time for us. Me and my partners were reading this book kind of together right before all this happened, called the Culture Code, The Secrets of Highly Successful Groups. And it's just a fascinating read in general, a good combination of storytelling, data, as well as really practical application. And it really is about how do highly functioning, highly successful groups, how are they created? And obviously a great ingredient to that is a good leader. And so from this book, not only get the dynamics of how a group can function at its best, but then how to get that group to do that. And so for us, it's been a little bit of a guidepost on things we were already starting to implement and changes around our company that I think help set us up for success for this great period of change and turmoil that we all experienced the past 2 months. So I would highly recommend that book, The Culture Code, by Daniel Coyle.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Keith. Melea, how about you?
Well, freshly coming off my executive MBA, I've done a lot of reading of late, and there are 4 that really stood out to me as I went through this 22-month journey. The first is Leading Change by John Kotter. He has an 8-step change management process that I have implemented several times within my own organization now. And I was actually studying this last semester. So the timing was perfect in terms of helping me to navigate my team through this crisis. So some from the past, Originals by Adam Grant, How Nonconformists Move the World. This is for anybody that has that inner desire, I think, to be an entrepreneur. It is an excellent read. And then there's Drive by Daniel Pink. He's just one of my favorite authors, and it's all about that motivation that motivates you to become a leader. And then finally, and one of my favorites, and I think anybody that aspires to be a CEO or an entrepreneur should read the book Executive Presence by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. It's all about communication, appearance, kind of that overall gravitas that one needs to get to that role at the top. So those would be the 4 that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, you are exceedingly well read. I need to probably sign up for your executive MBA program. Get some knowledge as well. Thank you for that.
Absolutely, Wesley.
Rich, I'm going to give you, before we pause, I'm going to ask Madison. I think we're down to probably about 2 or 3 minutes before we have closing remarks and any other questions that may have come in through chat that you'd like me to ask, or that Madison would like to ask. And this last question, I think, is directed. I'm going to have to direct it to Rich, and that is, have you always wanted to be a CEO or a leader of an organization? And if that's always been your goal, what's been your motivation to achieve it?
Okay, that's a great question, and I did not have any goal aspirations to be the president or CEO of an organization. And I grew up in Topeka, and my parents were both successful school teachers and really a pretty simple life. And my dad and my mom taught me that there's 2 ways to get noticed, and one is to ask for it, and one is to earn it. And I was much more on the earn it side. And I believe that if you did a good job, over time, you'd take the next step in your career. But I never really even thought about the president and CEO, but something changed. And I think it's probably one of the most important changes in business in the last 10 to 15 years. And that's the rise of the empathetic leader. I think I was just brought up on Hollywood and TV thinking that the leaders of organizations, wore capes and they swooped in and had all the answers and knew everything and could save the day. And the reality is the best leaders are the leaders that care, that show empathy, and they create an environment where the employees can do their most creative and courageous thinking. And once my paradigm switched on that, I began to see myself as having the potential to be a leader as well. But to answer the question, I never really thought about being a president and CEO really until I was probably into my late 40s or even close to 50. And my motivation at that point in time had more to do with how much I cared about the company that I worked for and giving opportunities to the employees and not really anything for myself. So that was a long answer. Sorry about that.
No, that's a good answer, though. I think back to when I was, quote unquote, anointed to be the managing partner at the Kansas City office of Bryan, Leighton, Paisner. And I remember a conversation that I had with my niece at the time, who was, I think, in the 2nd or 3rd grade. She didn't have a concept of managing partner or CEO. She just knew that I was, quote unquote, the boss. She asked me, she says, so now that you're no longer a partner, but you're the managing partner, she said, are you the boss of everyone? And my response to her was, well, not exactly. I'm kind of working for all of them now. So they're all my bosses as opposed to me being their boss. And to your point that you made earlier, Rich, it really is about, I think, servant leadership. And that's probably the most important attribute that I think a leader of an organization, particularly during times of change, can aspire to have is the concept of servant leadership. And with that, Madison, I know we're up against the clock. Are there any additional questions that need to be posed? Are there any closing remarks that you'd like to provide?
No questions from the audience. When people registered for this event, they submitted a question there. So, which I believe that we hit majority of the questions that were submitted. So I'm going to pass it to Margaret.
Thank you, Madison. And thank you, Wesley, for all of those wonderful questions. Looks like we hit everything that everyone wanted to hear about, so that's great. Thank you, Rich, Melea, and Keith, for that wonderful and uplifting conversation. We heard some great advice and insights from you all, and it's just what we young professionals need to hear right now, I think more than ever. Thank you to everyone for attending this afternoon, and thanks again to our sponsors. This webinar was recorded, so we will send out a link to everyone after this, and it will also be posted on the Chamber's YouTube account. We also ask that you please complete the post-event survey, which will be sent to your emails shortly to help us plan more events like this. And lastly, don't forget to follow genKC on social media for updates on upcoming events. So with that, thank you all and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. It's fun.
Thanks, Wesley.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.